Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss an idea bobbing around which may or may not be part of the official Northern Ireland Protocol discussions, but which might address one of the specific concerns that the DUP have about any settlement. Sunak may or may not be willing to go through with a deal without DUP support, but it would be a game-changing win for him if he could get it. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I feel that this week is going to carry on where last week left off, with the Northern Ireland Protocol being the main topic of interest, at least as far as this channel is concerned, with all of the wider issues that may result in. Last week was, I think, a seminal moment for the post-Brexit direction of travel, basically, after the government explicitly admitted to Brexit damage. And this week may be where they start slowly to correct some of that damage. But I'm going to discuss that angle a little bit more tomorrow. For now, we've got an interesting little idea just bouncing around here, reportedly on the periphery of the discussions. So one of the DUP's stated concerns over our post-Brexit future is accepting EU rules without representation. Obviously, we all used to have representation, but leaving meant that was no longer the case. You know, in my view, it shouldn't really be that big a deal. We are subject to rules all the time without having a say in the people who construct those rules. All the time. We all follow rules at work. We don't vote on the people who decide those rules. Anyone who wants to export will follow the rules of the market they are exporting to. No representation. When we travel abroad, we follow the laws of our host country. We didn't vote for anyone who made those laws. Even travelling around our own country, we obey the bylaws in a particular region. But if we don't live in that region, we didn't vote for the politicians who made those rules. Representation and rules do not always go hand in hand. We accept that. And several countries in Europe are members of the single market without being members of the EU. So they accept rules without serious representation. They don't have representation in the EU Parliament or in the EU Commission or even in the EU Council, really. But if we're thinking of EFTA, the governments within it do hold discussions on rules. So they do make representation. They don't get a vote, but they do get a say. Now, this idea, which I saw reported on the BBC website, might present a similar solution here. You know, will Northern Ireland, will Stormont have a say in new rules applied to them as a result of the EU Parliament adopting new rules, which would then have to apply to Northern Ireland as a result of their continued access to the single market for goods. Now, bear in mind, just because Northern Ireland has access to the single market for goods doesn't mean all EU rules apply to them, only the ones that are necessary to maintain the integrity of the single market. But this idea, and I don't know exactly where it comes from, is that a petition of concern could be used. Now, a petition of concern exists in Stormont. It was a device introduced during the Good Friday Agreement, which is intended to empower minorities in what was and still is a very sectarian Northern Ireland. The way it works is that, say a particular group has an objection to some legislation. There's some legislation that's going to be passed through and it's got majority support, so it'll be passed through. But let's say it would harm a minority group, whether by design, because it's highly sectarian, or just by accident. If a third of MLAs sign a petition of concern, then the legislation can only pass if it has 60% support. It's not enough for majority support, has to have 60% support and must have the backing of 40% of nationalist and unionist MLAs who are at least present in Stormont at the time. Now, as there are currently 37 unionist MLAs after the most recent Stormont elections, that means 15 of them would need to back the new rules. So let's say 23 unionist MLAs opposed it, then the rule could not be adopted. Now, the TUV can be counted on to oppose anything, I suppose. So if the more normal unionist MLAs saw no problem with it, that would still mean 4 MLAs from the DUP would be needed to back the legislation in order to have it passed if this petition of concern were to be presented. So it would mean that the DUP, if they were united in their opposition to a new rule, could have the numbers to block it without needing to have a majority support for their position in Stormont. However, because it would need the support of 30 MLAs in the first place just to get this petition of concern imposed, and the DUP and the TUV together have 26 MLAs between them, it would need other unionist MLAs to want to block the legislation as well. So it would give a lot of power to the DUP to have a say over new EU rules. Not so much that they could just be awkward on a whim if there's no wider unionist support. Also, if a future Stormont election diminished the overall unionist representation, or at least the DUP's representation, with the Alliance Party maybe gaining more ground, then it would be harder for this mechanism to be used just out of spite. So that then brings two major questions here. The first is, would the DUP accept this? Because if not, absolutely zero point in pursuing it. It's not in isolation a good thing. It's not a good mechanism. It will cause problems down the line. This will cause a bust up in the future. It wasn't help. It's not. I've said in the past, it's not helpful for the long term to have ever allowed the power sharing arrangement, any of the power sharing partners to collapse the entire assembly. That's not helpful. It's not helpful for a minority of MLAs to be able to collapse the assembly or to be able to block legislation vexatiously. But if it will unlock support for the wider deal, you can see how it might be attractive. And at the end of the day, all agreements in Northern Ireland effectively have to have some drawbacks anyway, just because of the nature of Northern Irish politics. So Sunak, he could just ignore the wishes of the DUP. If they won't be reasonable, he could just say, well, sod you. At the moment, their only leverage is holding the function of Stormont over them. But, Stormont collapses all the time. Even if the DUP agree to Sunak's deal and agree to new elections and will agree to form the executive, no matter the results, even playing second fiddle to Sinn Féin, there's no guarantee that they will. And if they did, there's no guarantee that either they or Sinn Féin wouldn't collapse the assembly like a year later over some other quarrel. If Sunak doesn't think he can get Stormont up and running anyway, is it really leverage? The DUP have to give him some indication there's a landing zone here. Sunak knows that he will never use the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, which is what the DUP would really prefer. He's not going to. So if the DUP will not agree to anything that is realistic, However, if they are prepared to agree to certain realistic terms, then Sunak, of course, will want to bend over backwards to get the DUP on board. It would not only mean putting the protocol to bed, but getting Stormont back up and running. It will be a definite sign that he is getting done the job of clearing up Boris Johnson's mess. Huge boost to him. But then there's the second big question, of course. Is it realistic? Would the EU go along with it? See, it would be natural to think that the EU will go, hang on a minute, this is a situation whereby Stormont ends up blocking new rules out of some childish desire to cause trouble. But given that this would only apply to new rules, will it be that big a deal? The purpose of the protocol is to have a reasonable level of security over the single market borders and to ensure the continuation of the peace process in Northern Ireland. Now, imposing a mechanism on any of the major sectarian groups in Northern Ireland, including the DUP, is not exactly conducive to that peace process. I suppose an assessment would be made as to whether such a mechanism, which is going to cause trouble in the future, does it pose a serious risk to the single market? Because the Northern Ireland Protocol already represents a risk to the single market, just a manageable one. If the risk can be assessed to be low, even if Northern Ireland will at times fail to apply all the rules properly, then the idea maybe has legs. After all, even EU member states sometimes fail to apply EU rules properly, and they don't have the excuse of not having a say in them. This is why the EU takes individual member states to court all the time. Unfortunately, the article wasn't able to really say at what level this idea is being discussed, other than it has come up. But it is a scheme that, if supported by the DUP and accepted by the EU as low risk to them, could unlock a major feather in Rishi Sunak's rather battered cap. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later. Not even summer. Some tosser's got their lawnmower going.